One of the things that happened during the reporting of that story is that we discovered that Elon had, let's just say, a very indifferent attitude towards free speech. It's a weird one, right? Like, as you say, he's sort of the Wizard of Oz of X, and his account is the all-powerful medium through which everything is understood. Something similar is going on behind the scenes. It's just that it's kind of more overt with Elon.
Matt Taibbi just slammed Elon Musk for turning his back against free speech despite working with him to release the Twitter files in 2023. And he gets into some of the oddities that occurred along the way and some of the things he discovered in the course of that investigation that put him in a difficult position and led to a rift with Musk. So let's get into that. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
As someone who appeared to be initially enthusiastic about the arrival of Elon Musk on the political scene, his purchase of Twitter, you worked with him on the Twitter files. You then seem to have become a bit more disillusioned. Talk us through that journey.
Well, I was initially enthusiastic about Elon purchasing Twitter. I didn't know a whole lot about Elon Musk before that moment. I wasn't someone who paid a lot of attention to Tesla or any of his other exploits until then. But as far as Twitter went, people have to remember that before Elon took over Twitter, there was a significant problem with digital censorship that was kind of a new phenomenon in the United States, capped off by sort of the remarkable incident just before the election in 2020, when Twitter and Facebook locked out a story about Hunter Biden that seemed to have been prompted by a request from law enforcement. And we had never seen anything like that in the United States before. We don't have like D notices and things like that to suppress information. So when he came in promising that there would be a free speech platform and it would return to that and that he would allow all legal speech, we were naturally excited. And then
yeah, a lot of us were excited, naturally so, because this seemed to rupture the status quo in social media and the liberal establishment control over it. This kind of propensity toward bannings and digital censorship started, in my estimation, in large part when Alex Jones got banned off virtually every social media platform. And then a lot of people cheered that, saying, well, he was just a conspiracy loon, so this is a great thing. Well, the precedent that set was horrendous, because then they went to Nick Fuentes and, Alex Berenson for daring to, buck the establishment mentality of COVID and the vaccines, and on and on and on, until we get to these stories that the state is trying to suppress. And that's what the Twitter files did. It revealed that basically every three-letter agency under the sun was using the coercive mechanisms of government to twist the arms of these social media platforms to do away with stories it didn't like, including the Hunter Biden laptop, which they said was disinformation, despite it not being so. And that's where we are today. That still happens, but I think that there is some headway being made against this.
When he started talking about, well, there were rumors that he was going to open up the files of Twitter to reporters, I kind of raised my hand publicly and volunteered to do that, and I got a call and worked on that story. There was a significant progression there, I think, in two directions. One was learning about Elon's true feelings about free speech, and the other was the material that was in the Twitter files, which was extremely revelatory in a different direction.
Right, so let's just start with the Twitter files component, because that, in a way, exposes the old regime, doesn't it? This is why, and I was 100% with you on this. I mean, unheard, we have been campaigning for free speech for years. We have also come up against what was a very opaque and scary set of obstacles to normal political discourse since at least 2020 and possibly before, on topics like COVID and BLM and the trans controversy and all of those things, where you couldn't say really normal political things without risking censorship.
Yeah, this was the norm on social media at the time. I mean, you saw this in dissident right-wing circles especially. It seemed to be targeted over this, maybe, anti-war leftist circles too, but what we know is the establishment had a line they wanted you to read, and if you departed too far from that, you risked having your account banned and the information that you put out on that respective social platform banned. Wouldn't be a problem in the aggregate if we're really talking about like a private company, but that's not what this was. This was the combination of government power and big tech to censor people. It was a violation of their speech rights because the government was involved in leading big tech down this direction. Mark Zuckerberg later even admitted it, and he was culpable with it and responsible for following that line, but he has admitted this.
So I was very excited, as you were, that something better might come along. In the Twitter files, that's not what this interview is about, but just to summarize it for listeners who may not be aware, what did you find out?
The most important story that we discovered is that there was a significant formalized channel of communication between the American law enforcement and intelligence services and all the platforms. They had regular meetings. There were formalized recommendations on content that were sent out in kind of a subterranean way to, probably 24 different companies. And this was something, again, we hadn't seen before. Now, there was an aspect that we only caught a little bit of at the end of the Twitter files that is relevant to what's going on in Europe. We started to see communications about the United States maybe integrating with European regulations like the Code of Practice on Disinformation and potentially the coming Digital Services Act. But mostly we learned about this American thing, which has been kind of suppressed since then.
So just to spell it out, the scandal, the thing we were all so upset about was that the government and law enforcement and federal agencies were too close to what was supposedly a free media platform. It was in a kind of idea of a properly functioning democracy, the media should be separate from the government.
Especially in the United States, because our First Amendment system does not permit even a whiff of that, right? Like we're
And no one's going to get punished for it, too, once this is exposed, and this should have been the biggest story in the legacy media. They completely ignored the Twitter files. It was thanks to people like Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger and Li Fang releasing this information that dissidents learned about it, and it was on Twitter. Thankfully, that happened. But this was just buried under the rug, and no one's going to pay the price for it in government, because government isn't democracy. It's an oligarchy. It's a carefully orchestrated group of people that maintain power for themselves, violate our rights, steal from us, perpetuate endless wars, expand the surveillance state, and they say it's all for our benefit. That's what our criminal government does.
Not even the government doesn't even theoretically have the right to be in the business of speech recommendations, right? So it's different than it would be in other countries.
So fast forward to end of 2022, Elon Musk purchases Twitter. Already by the beginning of 2023, he is becoming very political. At some point after the election, he formally becomes associated with the government. And I guess that's my first question. At what point in that story did you start thinking, hold on, what we were upset about was that the government was too close to Twitter. Now, the second most important person in the government, arguably, at the time, owns and controls the platform. Is this better?
Well, first of all, I have to back up and talk about what had happened with all of us at the Twitter files. So one of the things that happened during the reporting of that story is that we discovered that Elon had, let's just say, a very indifferent attitude towards free speech. He suddenly started banning or de-amplifying accounts that he didn't like, and that put me in a very awkward position as a reporter, because was the story Elon or was the story the material I was working on? I thought the material was so important, I didn't say anything about it. Then finally, he sort of asked me to leave my home at Substack and move to Twitter during the reporting of the story. And I said I couldn't do that ethically because then we would have a financial relationship, at which point he de-amplified my account, and it's been de-amplified ever since. So my experience,
shadow banned, you might say.
I've been sort of significantly shadow banned to the point where it's cost me an enormous amount of money since
Yeah, actually, if you look at his account, an account of his size, I can't speak without being inside of Twitter to know, like, that's what actually happened. He did get shadow banned, but you look at his account, I think he has more than 2 million followers, a lot of which came because of his reporting on the Twitter files. It does seem to be that his posts don't get the same reach that they should, given that he's an extremely interesting person covering interesting stories. And what I'll say about this is that he worked alongside Michael Schellenberger as part of the Twitter files release, and Schellenberger has mostly backed up Taibbi and what he's saying about this. It seemed like one of the crux of the rift between Musk and Taibbi was that Musk on Twitter was, putting it into the algorithm to kind of, diminish the potential for Substack links where Matt Taibbi published on from being widely viewed. Like, those would be penalized innately, and Taibbi, publishes on Substack. He didn't want to leave Substack exclusively, and that seems to have caused a rift. As to who else Musk has shadow banned, I have no doubt that some bannings have occurred. And of course, they always use this mantra, well, they recommended violence against other people, and you can see Israeli officials posting violent information every day, death threats, in fact, against innocent people, and those accounts don't get banned. The one or two times I've seen Musk answer these sort of things, he says, well, they're a government entity, and if it's legal within that country to make these kind of death threats, we're not going to ban them on Twitter, which is a weird standard if you're applying the opposite standard to any one of us individually if we make death threats upon people.
Early 2023 now. So knowing that about Elon, that he has this very personalized idea about speech regulation, and look, and it's his platform, it's that attitude of his was still not as bad as what we had seen previously, which was a relationship with the government. As you point out, that changes when he became part of the government after the election, and now suddenly we're dealing with something that is a new phenomenon, which is a government employee in charge of one of the most important platforms in the world.
Yeah, and he's obviously no longer involved in Doge. He hasn't been to the White House since May. There was a big schism with Trump in which Musk famously said, well, Trump's not going to release the Epstein files. He was right about that because Trump's name is in the Epstein files. That's something that shouldn't be a revelation. In the investigation, the sitting U.S. president at the time of the investigation would appear, plus Trump was good friends with Epstein for a long time, regardless if you think he was associated with any of Epstein's nefarious and evil crimes. That is the truth. But at the same time, I have to compliment Taibbi for putting, his adversarial mentality toward Musk in some regards on hold to divulge the Twitter files story. That was important, and I'm glad that he did that. But also, he's just telling the truth as he sees it regarding this rift with Musk, and he's right. This presents a new problem where top officials in government are also in ownership of the largest news site on the internet. That is something of a conflict of interest, I would think. But at the same time, it's not like Musk thought that that's a workable situation. He just went on the All In podcast and said, his time in Washington proved he thinks we can't change things from the inside. We're doomed unless there's a mass awakening.
Yeah, and they hide behind this idea that he was never technically a government employee. He was a special government employee, didn't receive a salary or something. I mean, he attended cabinet meetings, in fact, seemed to run them at some points. He was definitely part of the government. Fast forward a little bit further, and his domination of the platform only increased. So although you were aware of sort of quite subtle behind-the-scenes interventions he was making about who would be shadow banned or de-amplified, and we also had some of those experiences directly with Elon, things then have become, in the year and a half since, just ever more, well, exaggerated. That there is this one character who is both the owner-proprietor, also the rule setter, and also the most followed person on this network, such that if you follow him, your entire feed is completely different to if you don't. It is very hard to see this anymore as a free speech platform in any kind of neutral sense. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do look at it a little differently, though. It's still a private company, so how different is it really from CBS, owning a gigantic media conglomerate, and its executives making decisions about which things they're going to highlight and which stories they're going to suppress, and that sort of thing. Obviously, internet platforms have a much greater reach. They're able to amplify and de-amplify conversations at the micro level, and distort realities in ways that people watching traditional media would never believe. But
yeah, I agree with Taibbi here. If anything, I think the acquisition of Twitter is a watershed moment in the rise of the independent media to displace the legacy media, like CBS, he pointed out, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, etc. Absolutely, it's in a better place than it was. Is it idealistic free speech down the line? No. I've already pointed out my gripes when it comes to, death threats and who gets banned for that and who doesn't. I've seen that play out. But this is a much more free speech oriented platform, relatively speaking, compared to the COVID regime era, that's for sure. And for that, I'm very thankful. I think Musk's instincts generally were good in terms of cutting spending and cutting government waste also. But once he got into Washington, he saw the enemy within the gates. He knew that at that point, and seeing how Republicans discuss this thing, is that Republicans and conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit. They weren't going to cut government. They weren't going to eliminate mass agencies by and large. They weren't going to cut out $2 trillion of spending. They just use the rhetoric that they will as an electoral mechanism to convince the populace to vote for them, and don't do it once they're in.
I just think that phenomenon is kind of consistent across social media now. Like if you go to Blue Sky, it's got the same kind of flavor of a politicized landscape that X does. It's just in a different direction. They all do that. I think what people need to understand is that they have to become literate about how to use social media and to understand what the particular influences are of that platform. And clearly on Elon's, it's a weird one, right? Like, as you say, he's sort of the Wizard of Oz of X, and his account is the all-powerful medium through which everything is understood. And we don't have that so much on Facebook, but something similar is going on behind the scenes. It's just that it's kind of more overt with Elon.
Yeah, certainly so. And Blue Sky is nowhere even near to the level of, importance and influence that Twitter is, for sure. But this is siloing, and it's siloing naturally because what Americans have been forced into viewing and digesting and being propagandized for virtually their entire lives has come through the filter of essentially 3 major media networks and what those talking heads sold them. And what those talking heads elevated, prioritized, which stories they underplayed and, kind of swept under the rug that they had to go off. Now we have an independent media where choices are available, and I'm glad for that. Even if they're partisan choices, like clearly Blue Sky is, Twitter would be considered that to some extent. I think Twitter's great. But Americans now have choices, and they don't have to just live in what my friend Tom Woods calls the 3x5 index card of allowable opinion. And Noam Chomsky said the best way to keep a people obedient was to allow very vigorous discussion and debate within very narrow confines. And that's what we see in the Uniparty. That's what we see in the Washington political establishment, which is the swamp that Trump didn't drain. And that's what you're seeing play out in the media. So are things better than the status quo of 2020? I think so in many ways. But at the same time, it does seem like Elon, perverted and betrayed some of his original sensibilities regarding speech. And I don't even think that's Elon's biggest problem. I love his instincts. He posts, Milton Friedman and Ron Paul clips on his website talking about how this is a real threat that Republicans are ignoring too. That's amazing. I applaud him every time, but he's not very critical of things like Palantir and their relationship with the surveillance state and their relationship with the CIA, maybe because of Elon Musk's close relationship with Peter Thiel, as he essentially built the groundwork with Thiel for PayPal. But that's where we're at. I love this conversation. I think Taibbi is one of the greatest journalists out there, so glad to hear this. Let me know down below, is Taibbi right? Has Elon turned his back on free speech? What is the direction of the independent media? Is it good? Let me know down below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Unheard. Great podcast. Thanks for this interview. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support my channel, and in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.